believe it? Autumn, come on, look at us. Look at me. This is the first time I'm wearing this. Come on. We're in the same. What's your color?
Black.
This is kind of like deep brown, but
Uh-huh.
we're on the same wavelength. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Talk to me about your necklace.
About my necklace. I actually made this necklace. A friend of mine, we went to this jeweler. It was in Ohio and like a metalsmithing jewelry place, and they had a cool little workshop. And so I got to totally play around with it. And I made it in the time when I was traveling to Haiti like several times a year. So I was like, I want my own little piece. And so I kind of came up with like, I tried to get the design to capture the country as much as possible. And then we played around with colors. And so there's a way that you can add colors on there that gives kind of like the greenish. And then I did a little red for Port-au-Prince because that's where I would go was
Oh,
Port-au-Prince.
so when did you do that?
I traveled to and from Haiti. My first trip was in October of 2015. And then my last trip was like the spring of 2019. And 16 through 19, I went several times a year.
Why did you go?
So it was really cool. I started working with an organization that sold jewelry and things made by women around the world in 2014. Doing that kind of launched a whole trajectory that was really, really cool for me. I got to hear stories of people who were overcoming massive poverty. Most of the artisans were women and they faced gender issues. Many had been abused. Some were acid victims. Just a bunch of really hard stories. But they were making jewelry and scarves and other things like that. And so it was a really cool way to be able to share their stories and support them as artisans and raise awareness to that. And part of being in that organization, they had what they called vision trips instead of a mission trip, right? We're not going there to save them, but it's a chance to get to meet the artisans, see what their lives look like, see what the community looks like, and then be able to tell their story a little bit better. So I had applied for a couple of different ones, and then I was accepted to go to the trip in Haiti. And so when I went there, it was 5 days or a week, something like that. We met the artisans. We got to try and make some of the things that they were making and see. They were making beads out of cereal boxes. And so we got to try it, and I was like, I'll sell them. And so that was my first trip there. And it just, I don't know, something about it just sat in my heart in like the best way possible. I stayed in contact with people down there. And then the following spring going into summer, one of the ladies who was down there, she's from the States, but she was working down there. And she was going to be spending some time in the States, like an extended stay, needed somebody to stay at her place and kind of put out a like a feeler of like, hey, before I put this on any sites or whatever, is anyone in my network interested in coming and taking care of my house for a few weeks or whatever? I was like, me. So I thought about it and I wanted to say yes immediately, but I was like, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I have like, I'm working. What's the reality that I could just go to Haiti for weeks? And I woke up the next morning, I was like, I have to make this happen. I was like, I can't not try. And so we were talking and we worked out a whole deal where I was able to help her with some things for her organization and do that in place of paying to stay there. I spent 6, almost 7 weeks in Haiti in summer of 2016 and changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. It was such a catalyst in my life to do that. There were so many things that I had to wrestle with being down there of just kind of like wealth disparity and racial issues and colonization and, really tragic histories and environmental struggles and so many things, safety. And, I was there when all of the stories of, cops in the US were killing citizens and especially Black citizens. And I was in Haiti. And I was like, this is kind of an interesting dynamic where I'm in the more minority down here and I feel really safe down here, even though it was wild and crazy. I could talk forever about it.
You used the word of catalyst. So it was
Yeah.
a catalyst for you. For what?
For a few things. One, I was going through some really intense struggles in my marriage and at work and some things with my kids at that time. And it was a space to kind of give me some clarity on what's working, what's not working, and what do I need to do. So it kind of gave me space to breathe and get a sense of just clarity for myself of, am I going to keep worrying about what other people say about me if I make this sort of a change, or am I just going to do what I know that I need to do? And so having that possible, so that was one catalyst. I did wind up, I got divorced, I changed jobs, I moved, I essentially overhauled my entire life after I came back. I started to realize how important, like just the way that I'm wired, how important being involved in organizations that are doing good in the world and can feel confident that, if I'm sharing their message, I know that they're doing something good. No company or organization ever gets all of it right, but the intention behind it is to learn how to do good things and continue to make improvements on impacting lives and that sort of thing. So just kind of started me down that path of realizing how important that is for me. Being involved with the organization of selling jewelry and scarves beforehand kind of laid the groundwork of doing that work, and through that had that opportunity to go down there for the first time and get to see the artisans. So there was that little piece of, I had to first recognize like, oh, I'm interested in sharing stories of women who are overcoming hard things. And from there, then I've always loved travel. So travel's always been kind of a theme that's run through my life since infants. So there's always been that little bit of an element of like, ooh, where do we get to go? I'm excited. This is really cool. So that part of it wasn't that much of a stretch. But to go to Haiti, I mean, obviously that's not like the first destination that people are normally thinking of. Even though it's in the Caribbean and it's the gorgeous Caribbean waters and the tropics and all of the fresh fruits and everything that grows there. Like there's all of that that's there, but there's also massive amounts of chaos and, just really, really hard struggles. So going there the first time, and then just staying connected and wanting to know more about what they were doing really just kind of continued to light that fire. And one thing that was interesting with that is in the back of my mind, because of all of the struggles I was having in my personal life, I had actually put a timeline for myself. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep trying to fix things and make things better at home. If they aren't better by this particular day, I need to draw the line and say, this is not healthy. I have to make a change. And it was like a week later that I saw that notification about having an opportunity to spend extended time there. So I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. I had no idea. And my kids were 16 and 15. So it's not like, I mean, the good thing is that, they had a good relationship with their dad and they were able to stay with him. But it was a little scary. So I was like, is everyone going to be okay? Who just ups and leaves their family for 7 weeks when they've got kids who are involved with a bunch of different things and, full-time work and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so just kind of step by step put all of those details together, got somebody that trained them to cover my position at work and coordinated with the kids and their dad what they were going to do during that time. And I was like, I have to go do it. I will regret it later in life if I don't do this, even though it's challenging to make it work.
That sounds amazing. And I'm looking at, you mentioned a few pieces in terms of not the masks, but things
Mhm.
we have to deal with. And you have all these masks behind you. Can you talk a little bit about that? For those of you who are listening, you're not able to see that, but just imagine for those of you who are watching, you will see all those masks. So walk us through the masks.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because over time I've started to realize that I can definitely apply some like deeper layers to the masks, but at a very surface level, when I was a kid, my grandpa, he had been a flight engineer. And so in one of the rooms in his house, I could just stand there and stare at this forever. He had a map of all of the flights that he had taken. And so all these little arched red and blue lines around the globe. He had flown international and domestic. And so he had lived like a huge chunk of my growing up time. He had lived in Dubai and he lived in Saudi Arabia and he worked for royal families of Iran before the fall, and then Dubai before it expanded and grew financially, and then in Saudi Arabia as well. And he had this section of this grouping of masks around the map. And he had picked it up and they represented different countries. And so I remember like something from Europe had this guy with a big beard and a pipe and the little hat. And so they kind of represented characters that you would imagine of people who lived in these different countries. So I've always had this in the back of my mind and just been fascinated by it. And then when I was in Haiti, for those who are watching on here, the first one that really captured my attention was it's above me over here. It's this little mask. It's made out of wood. It's very, very colorful. It's kind of a narrow face and it has like blues and oranges and reds on there. I just thought it was really, really cool looking. So that was the first one that I ended up getting. And then on another trip, we went down to Jacmel, which is on the southern coast of Haiti. It's hours of going over mountains and it's quite the ride to get there. And we were wandering through shops and I came across this one here, which that's actually leather from cows in Haiti. And I just thought it was gorgeous, like this swept hair coming off the side of it and like the face kind of drawn on there and everything. And so they just captured my attention. And then in 2024, I did a couple of study abroad programs and I was in Italy and I was like, well, I have to look for masks when I'm in Italy. And so I found this gorgeous beauty in Rome. It's actually a Venetian mask. I had gone up to Venice and found a couple masks. That little one. It's like the little carnival face there. But the Venetian one that's behind me, it's gold flake painted. And then I think it's like a silk fabric, like a really light cornflower blue or something. It's really, really light with like gold designs in there. It's actually a theater mask from the 1920s. I found it in a little antique shop in Rome. And I was like, well, you are coming home with me. And I felt like I was talking to my grandpa in that process of it. It was really cool. I was like, Grandpa, like, look at this gorgeous mask that I just found. Like, thank yous, So this really cool connection that I found there. And so I've had fun displaying them. And then I don't have them behind me, but I also have a couple from Morocco that I got when I was there in the fall. There's layers to it in that capacity. And over time, I started thinking about it and I was like, oh, I kind of feel like maybe I've worn masks for a long time in my life as well. And it was a way to put some of those pieces on display and then not have to have them on me. So I'm kind of still noodling with that
Sure.
concept.
That would have been my question. I think it's really cool what you shared. Do you feel a connection? Maybe you're not completely conscious of it, but do you feel a connection with your grandpa when you have those masks behind you? Because it's something that he had in his study when you were growing up. And two, what you just mentioned, and that is the masks that we wear, and we all do
Hmm.
every day, and there are so many different of them, different sizes, different colors, different shapes, and anywhere in between. So do you feel that a little bit of what you have behind and a little bit of what you have represented in your space
Hmm.
allows you to breathe a little lighter, or does it add depth to your breathing, to your living, to your existence?
Those are great questions. So the first part of it was kind of interesting because my grandpa was traveling so much during my younger years. Most of my time was spent with my grandma. My grandpa would be home like maybe once or twice a year for extended times, but he was predominantly in Saudi when I was growing up. So the masks was my connection to my grandpa for a good chunk of time, and most of the time I spent with my grandma. So I kind of always identified my grandma as like a really key female figure in my life. I didn't grow up with my mom, so my grandma was there. Over the years, I've always felt more of a connection with her and not as much with my grandpa. And then this past year when I was in Rome for a number of months, something about being there just, I don't know. I felt like this new connection with him that I hadn't before. And I think it was because I was gone. I was away from home. I was out in another part of the world, making my way and figuring out how to navigate this other country. And something just started to connect with him there. And I kind of just felt this pull of like, oh, okay, just keep checking out different countries and traveling. And there's so many lessons that you can learn through that about yourself and about the world and bigger concepts and things. I started to feel more of that connection to him than I did when I was younger. And then to the second part about wearing masks, I think we all do to some extent for a variety of reasons. And for me growing up, I kind of always felt a little bit like an outsider. I grew up in the 80s, and at that time, most families were still together. There weren't very many divorced families, and my parents were divorced, and I was raised by my dad. To be a girl raised by her dad in the 80s was just such an anomaly that I kind of felt a little bit of an outsider in that capacity. And then a variety of other ways that I kind of just always felt a little different than people. And then I started moving around a bunch and just kind of always stayed somewhat distant from people. I kind of had an internal barrier, I guess you could say, of where I felt comfortable letting people in. Especially the more that I started moving, I was like, this is really, really hard to leave again. And the pain of having like a really strong relationship and then leaving it. And of course, that was before socials and easy ways to stay in contact. So it became really easy to lose connection with people. So I think I kind of always wore a little bit of a mask of this is how I feel safe presenting myself to people. And I'm okay developing a relationship up until here. And like, but you're not going to come here. I'd say probably my 40s has definitely been kind of a flip your life around decade for me and have started slowly peeling that mask off and just realizing that sometimes life isn't great and sometimes we have to start over and sometimes we have to learn new things that we didn't learn before. Digging into that a little bit and learning how to not always have to act like everything's fine and put on a smile and ignore the problems. So I guess now that as I'm learning to take the mask off, I'm putting them on the wall.
I love it. Now, you mentioned the 40s, which actually I feel the same happened with me. Kind of
Mhm.
like entering the 40s and you're starting to ask the questions, what is really relevant, what really isn't, and you should shed. Was there a specific moment that propelled you towards shedding the masks? And also something that I wanted to explore with you, and that is curiosity. So,
Yeah.
was there a specific moment? And then again, you've always been curious from the moment I knew you and we met online. You talked a little bit about the books that you knew as a child and you loved as a child. And there were all these beautiful books like about curiosity and learning about different things. So, the moment and curiosity right now and going forward, like where are you finding yourself now? And was there a specific place where you're like, you know what? This can exist and should exist, but I'm moving forward.
Yeah. So I think it was around the time that I was turning 40 that I remember talking to one of my colleagues at the time and I remember asking her, I was like, have you found that people, I know everyone talks about the midlife crisis. I'm like, I feel like there was a switch that just like flipped in my brain, and I didn't really look at it as like a crisis, but something clicked and just went, I don't care what people think anymore in a way that didn't make sense in my younger decades, especially like 20s and 30s. You're trying to figure life out and there's kind of this expectation of what people would think about me and trying to meet up to that. And something just clicked and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to meet people's expectations. And there are things that I haven't learned that I can learn. I'm still capable. I can go back to school. I can do those sorts of things. So life had just gotten really, really hard up until that point, and something just clicked. That click combined with the hardness of what was going on just really helped me to realize, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I was like, it's time to focus on how to get healthy. And so that became my focus. And I was like, I'm picking a word, and my word is health. And so I started looking at like, how do I make all areas of my life healthy? And that's still a work in progress. There's elements of that that happen throughout your life. So I started with exercising, paying attention to finances, going back to school, changing jobs, all that sort of thing was starting to focus on like, okay, let's get mentally healthy, let's get financially healthy, let's get physically healthy, let's get emotionally healthy. I think in doing that, I started to recognize the kind of deep curiosity that's within me. And over time, I would journal about it. Not too long ago, I was flipping through some old journals and I was like, huh, what's in here? I was writing all about curiosity, and it's like 3 or 4 years ago. I'm like, I don't even remember. So I think it's been something that's been part of me for a long time. But in the last couple of years, I really started leaning into that and become curious about curiosity and recognizing how much of a powerhouse thing it is. And I haven't been able to quantify it if it's like a character, if it's an emotion, if it's a trait. I think it kind of encompasses all of that, or a mindset. But yeah, curiosity is such a powerful tool. And I believe that it's something that can grow. You know, mine was, okay, things are not going well. I need to change this. And so it was very practical. And it was just curious enough, like, well, where can I move? What can I afford? What can I do? And like, those were the types of questions. And then once I got on my own, one of my favorite kind of like big stories that happened with curiosity was, when I moved on my own, like that was really, really hard. I was like, I need to reclaim some things for myself. So I started paying attention to what brought me joy. And it was a cup of coffee. It's like the simplest thing possible, just a cup of coffee. And as I would make my cup of coffee, I started paying attention to how do I like it prepared and what type of coffee do I like and that sort of thing. So I was playing around with, Chemex or drip or French roast, discovered that I liked French roast. Then I started getting curious about, well, where do all of the beans come from? Like, where in the world? And what is the different types of beans? And how is roasting happen? And coffee grows in Haiti. And so on one of my trips that I was down there, I started asking people there, I was like, do you know anybody that I could join their group and go to a coffee farm, and so that kind of led to this whole experience of curiosity, and finally found a group that was going up to visit somebody who grew coffee. Nothing commercial. She grew it for her family. She sold it at the markets, but it was the coolest experience. We took what they call it a tap tap, which is a taxi. It's essentially like if you think of the old Toyota trucks from the 80s or 90s, and then they put this big metal cage over the top of it with a door that you can go in and out in the back, really brightly colorful painted. They're beautiful and fun. So we rode that up there and then we got out, we hiked and, had to go in like all of this mud and everything. And we had to walk past a bull to get to the house. It was like just chained up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? We had to walk past a bull. So we had to walk about past the bull, and then we get over to the property and we meet Anita, and there's 3 generations of people who were living on this property. She invited us into her home, which was, one room. That way we could be out of the rain. There's a shed next to it where she had her stove, and she's making us coffee. And, so I got to watch her brew it, kind of the Haitian way of brewing. They put the sugar cane in the water and put the beans and then like this whole big cloth sieve thing that they do. And then we're standing outside and it was the most surreal moment, but one of my, I think it's probably the best cup of coffee I've ever had in my entire life. I was standing there, a few feet away from me is a coffee tree with berries on it that are like preparing for the next harvest. They're growing. And Anita serves on a tray these beautiful little saucers with coffee and the saucer, cup and saucer. And it was like so dark and so rich. And it was so surreal. So we've got the beans behind me, and then I'm drinking this coffee. that she had grown and harvested and dried and roasted and ground and prepared and served to us. The most amazing farm to table that you could get. And then when I got back at the end of the day, I realized I hadn't even thought about it at the beginning of the day that that was my grandmother's birthday.
Mm.
So it was just really special, the whole experience, because my grandma had also taken everyday things and made them really special. Like she would make oatmeal and serve it to me in her china dishes. And so it was just like this full circle moment. And so it kind of captured for me this essence of curiosity of like just trying to reclaim something of joy and seeing where it can go. Now, as I travel, I love to try coffee in different like the different way it's prepared in different countries. So now I've had coffee made in, of course, the US and Haiti and Italy and Scotland and England and Turkey and Spain and Morocco. Pretty dang amazing. So curiosity about coffee has led me around the world.
I love it so much. And there are so many ways that I want to take this to two things. Number one, you just mentioned your grandma and that it was her birthday and then she raised you and
Hmm.
and there were so many different special things about her, but that she took the mundane things and made them special.
Hmm.
And second, curiosity can be a little dangerous. So a lot of people just don't try it. At a
Yeah,
certain point in our lives, we're like, maybe not." So you took a leap, but it's
mhm.
something more to you. Like you've been working on curiosity and it's something that you've been playing with, and that is you want to do a podcast
I do. Yeah.
focus on curiosity. So between your grandma and that, whichever you want to take first.
Well, let's talk about my grandma first because she's the cutest little thing ever. She was so adorable. My grandma, I swear, she's one of those women that everyone who knew her felt like they were her favorite. She just had this amazing way with the grandkids. I know we all thought we were the favorite grandchild because she just had this amazing way of making you feel special when you were there with her. I brought those sorts of little everyday joy moments into how I parented and how I lived my life. And so, we use nice dishes and real silverware. I much prefer real glass. Even if you have to go to the dollar store, I would get goblets from the dollar store just to have my water in there. It's not like you need to spend a ton of money. For raising my kids, I did not have very much money. So I was like, how can I do this the most frugal way possible? And so I just brought those lessons in from my grandma in there. Just make that everyday, just make it special. Because when you look back, those are the things that I remember. I didn't care about big, gigantic gestures. Those are nice, but every day is where we live, right? Like we don't live in the grand gestures, we live in the everyday. So I think making those, I like to say that I try and find pockets of joy every day. And it doesn't even have to be anything that you share with anybody else. Just taking a moment, even if it's 30 seconds to enjoy that sip of coffee or that sip of tea or whatever that little thing is, looking at that flower that you've grown and it's blooming now, and just that little bit that gives you excitement and joy. I think my grandma was really influential in bringing all of those things into my life and being a part of my life. So that's her, my cute little grandma. She was just the tiniest little thing and adorable and sweet. I love her so much. I miss her tremendously. I wish I could have one more of her hugs and some more of her pancakes. All of those fun little treats.
So she did something that was probably unusual, and that is she made every moment special.
Hmm.
Like whether it's through the dishes or with, your oatmeal in a special dish or
Yeah.
anything else that is not supposed to be special. It's supposed to be like an everyday kind of thing, it's a breakfast, whatever. She makes it special. So you transferred it to your kids and your life. And
Hmm.
something you just mentioned, you don't have to have a lot of resources. You just wanted it to be special and
Hmm.
looked at whatever you had available and you made it special. And something I picked up upon, if you weeks back, and that is
Hmm.
your love for curiosity, your zest for travel and
Hmm.
colors and different cultures and learning and experiences. So I just wanted you to tap into that a little bit, to the point that you've been thinking about starting your own program on
Hmm.
curiosity and travel. Where do you find yourself with that in terms of your life and being curious about things and exploring things? Because a lot of us kind of shut down, not exactly, but to a certain point, we're like,
Yeah.
maybe not. Keep going. And a lot of us keep going, like a few of us keep going, I should say. But how do you keep going and what
Hmm.
keeps you going? And how do we encourage others?
Those are such great questions. Yeah, so it's kind of been organic, just kind of following a little trail. And upon reflection, I've looked back and been able to see how curiosity is kind of this thread that's always made its way through. But definitely started very organic and just trying to pay attention to what was going on in my life and figure out what I wanted to do and what would be meaningful in my life. Those sorts of questions kind of pulled me along, I guess you could say. Then in part of some of my healing for different things, I started to want to learn more. I'd experienced trauma, and so I wanted to learn more about trauma. I was curious about that and like, okay, how do we heal from that? I love stories and, from movies to books to podcasts to whatever. I love hearing stories, and I think you can learn so much about life through a story way better, even if it's just completely fiction. I think that you can learn so much about life that is better than so many of the self-help books that are out there because you're watching it played out in a character. So I started reading different types of books to kind of broaden my understanding and things like that. So I read stories that took place in different parts of the world. So I was like, well, I can't really travel right now. So let me read a story about somebody who lives in South Africa or lives in India or lives in some other country whose life is very different than mine. And so that kind of got me curious about different parts of the world and different experiences, especially for women, but different experiences that people go through. So those sorts of things kind of pulled me along. And then a couple years ago, I was like, okay, I'm ready to finally go back to school. I've been trying to complete my bachelor's degree for a very long time. My daughter has gotten hers before I've gotten mine. As I was looking at different programs, I discovered one that's all about social sciences. And the whole thing is about learning aspects of humanity and social groups, cultures, things like that. And the way that it was set up, it's almost like a choose your own adventure type thing within this framework of learning how to be a social scientist. So I took those curiosities that I had of trauma and storytelling and healing, and that became kind of my study. A lot of the research that I was finding at first, I kind of struggled. I was like, am I on the right path? Is storytelling a way that you can heal? Over time, I did start to find some of that and recognize that yes, there's other people who are studying this as well. But that kind of pulled me along and helped with some of my healing and also helped to explore different avenues of curiosity. So trauma was the focus. And in that, I took a class that was about trauma related to crimes in World War II and, things that were happening in Germany, obviously the Holocaust. Learning about that and through there discovered about generational trauma and phantom trauma where people don't talk about it and how it plays out in their life. And so that got me really curious because I have family members who were in Germany. So I began curious of like, oh, what happened in previous generations that could be impacting my mother's generation, my kids' generation, and how do we begin to sort of heal from that? That led me to discovering a study abroad program that was all about the refugee crisis that took place in Rome. And so I was like, well, I have to apply for that. Like, that's entirely too amazing. That literally combines everything. So I went there, and that just continued to fuel everything of this is so big. There's so much to this. It was so transformational in understanding healing, in understanding how things play out in different generations. So it never stops. I just, I can't stop it at this point. I'm reading a book about
like,
Ottomans,
you
about
go
the
from
Silk
you go
Road.
from one
Like,
and be like, woo, you're going to the whole world, which I respect so much.
yeah, it started because I was curious about my coffee. And now I'm like, I need to go everywhere and learn everything.
Look, I'm gonna take you back to your coffee,
Yeah.
and then for the women primarily who are maybe curious about a thing or two, but they are moms and they're maybe grandmas and they feeling like they know their life the way it is, but it's just not enough.
Hmm.
And they can feel curious at moments like, oh, I would love to know more about this and that. And then you kind of shut down and like, this is not your place. You know your
Yeah.
life. You're supposed to go a certain way. And
Yeah.
what would your recommendation be? And I know it's a big question, but if you start from the simple, the little things.
Yeah. That's, I think, my biggest encouragement to people is that start where you're at. Like, you don't have to start with how do I solve this gigantic thing in the world or discover, the most mind-blowing thing. Start with what you're curious about today. If it's coffee, start like, how do you like your coffee? It could be what you wear. Maybe be curious about like, what colors do I enjoy? What makes me feel good when I put it on? What fabrics or what do I care about the things, the systems or the people that make it? Just to kind of like let those questions arise. Start with the simple. It could be very simple. It does not have to be very deep at all. It's like, do I like this? Do I not like this? Why do I like it? And then from there, you can begin to ask deeper and bigger questions. Do I like to wear black? Do I like to wear bright colors? These simple questions, and then start to go, well, how do I feel if I wear this color? Or if I paint my house this color, or if I put that type of a thing on the wall. And then, it can continue to progress from there of like, I wonder if I could do that. And when you feel a little fear of like, oh, I don't know, my life isn't really set up that I could leave it for 7 weeks. That was huge. I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, that was a risky thing to do. And I don't expect that everyone is going to be comfortable with that kind of a risk. I wouldn't necessarily like say, oh, yeah, you have to do that. You need to leave everything and you need to completely overhaul everything. No, just start where you're at. You know, change a little something or just begin to ask questions about a little something and then see where that leads and what the next question is that pops in your mind. I think in doing that, you'll discover things that you didn't think that you could discover. And you'll begin to ask questions that you didn't even know were possibilities to ask.
And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful note to end at.